Ladino, encyclopedia.com, Ladino, or Judeo-Spanish, the spoken and written Hispanic language of Jews of Spanish origin, the Jews of Spanish origin, Ladino, nothing to do with African, Judeo-Spanish or Judeo-Spanish, also known as Ladino, is a Romance language derived from Old Spanish, originally spoken in Spain, then and after the Edict of Expulsion, spreading through the Ottoman Empire, Balkans, Turkey, West Asia, North Africa, as well as France, Italy, Netherlands, Morocco, and England. It is today spoken mainly by Sephardic minorities. Ladino, who is the Sephardic Jews? Black Ladinos. Oh, Black Ladinos. Gosh, the hijack. Most of them were so-called black. It's more correct to say, oh, a white Ladino, because they were less. So it was more proper to label somebody a white Ladino than a black Ladino, because Ladinos were literally so-called Negro people. It says here, black Ladinos were Hispanicized black Latinos, exiled to Spanish America. Exiled where? Spanish America. Who they sent? Who was these Negroes they were replacing the Indians with? Oh, you thought it was Africans, right? So again, some of those were Indians from South America they were replacing with. Some of them were Indians from North America, from other parts of the Caribbean. But a lot of them were what? Black Latinos, basically Europeans, black Europeans. All right, I can't get any more clearer than that. I want you guys, I'm gonna use the tags so you guys can understand. It says in Spain they were referred to as negros latinos, cultivated or Latinized blacks, as opposed to negros bozales or bozo blacks, those captured in Africa. All right? They told you straight up, they're not coming from Africa. They're different than those. These Negroes were from Europe. All right? Black Latinos born in the Americas were Negroes, Criollos or Creole blacks, Creoles, Creole people of Louisiana, Creole blacks. Who's the Sephardic Jews? Who's these Huguenots? Who's these French? Yes. It's getting deep, man, I know. Talking about real history, real genealogy. Blackness in Latin America and the Caribbean, Eastern South America, edited by Norman E. Wynn, Arlene Torres. Man, there's so much drop. Upon the arrival of the Spanish conquerors, people of African descent contributed to the development of Puerto Rican society and culture. They mean people of dark complexion. That's all they're talking about when they put in that African word. So that's the hijack. They're not even talking about nationality or anything. They're talking about crayon colors here. That's a tag. However, the importation of people of dark complexion throughout the initial stages of the conquest was considered negligible and therefore not worthy of study. All right, not worthy of study. Why didn't you want to tell us about this? Luis and Diaz Solner's seminal work, Historia de la Esclavitud Negra en Puerto Rico, the story of black slavery in Puerto Rico, provides the basis for contemporary scholarship. Diaz Solner recognized that his work was a pioneering study in constant need for revision. 20 years passed before Sui Badillo, in a groundbreaking study co-authored with Angel Lopez Cantos, Puerto Rico Negro, Black Puerto Rico, challenged 16th century Puerto Rican historiography. People of African descent have yet to be fully written into the historical text of the 17th and 18th century. So what they're basically talking about is that a lot of these so-called famous black pioneers, so-called Spanish, Portuguese, black pioneers, settlers, colonists, whatever form they came in, serving slaves, they had a deep history that helped contribute to the colonization history of these Europeans colonizing America, and they got written out of history. That's what they're letting you know. They got kind of not written about. Why? If they were African, why would why? So wouldn't you want to continue with that fake story of them being African? Because if they really talked about these people and we actually looked for their background, we would realize they were Europeans they were bringing, not Africans. That's why. I'm telling you straight up. No holding bars today. I'm being straight up with you guys today. It's not conjecture theories. I'm talking about from what I have proven and what I have shown you guys. You can go back to my previous videos. Freed and free black men accompanied the Spanish explorers. All right, freed and free black men accompanied the Spanish explorers in their expeditions to various regions of the Americas. All right, Were they just slaves, or they were slaves, Kurimeo? That's because the white Spaniards were bringing black slaves from Africa, Kurimeo. That's why. Oh, they were only slaves? It says here they did so as fellow explorers. So there were slaves who were explorers. There were slaves who were soldiers, manual laborers, and servants. All right, so the explorers, conquistador explorers, they ain't exploring nothing. They ain't exploring nothing. They're conquering. That's the hijack with that word explorers. We already know. We already know. That's a hijack. Conquistador. They came as explorers, everything. They came in as everything because it was people being people. People happen to have dark complexion. These people happen to be so-called Negro. That doesn't make them evil or bad or good. It's the person's soul, their heart, who they are that makes them, what their actions, not their complexion. You guys are understanding? So they did so as fellow explorers. They came as explorers. The free black population consisted of Ladinos. Who's the Ladinos? Same Sephardic Jews, Muslim Moors. These were the ones they were sending, replacing the so-called Indians with first. That's what the Spanish did when Charles V said, hey, you can send 4,000 so-called Negroes over to the Americas. He was talking about Ladinos and whatever he had under his possession under so-called Negroes. And if we look at the slave records and what the Spanish and Portuguese were doing and really enslaving, we'll know that the other people were American Indians. We've proven that before. What Africans? Yeah, some Africans got caught up in this. Yes, but it wasn't mainly them. It was mainly so-called dark-skinned complexion, and even, we already know, light-skinned, pale-skinned, so-called white Europeans and American Indians that made up this whole slave narrative, or people who were doing the free labor. All right? The free black population, these people they were calling black, or free blacks that they were coming with Columbus and the Spanish and all these other so-called explorers. They were basically the same people. It was their friends, relatives, their servants, their captains. They try to separate them. They made you think that there were some white people bringing some African descendants who were living already in Spain for like 200-300 years, and they already had spoken Spanish. They dressed like Europeans. They spoke Ladino. Their whole culture was European. But they wanted you to think they were African. They wanted you to think they were African just because of their complexion. The free black population consisted of Ladinos, though. These were free Iberian black men who served the interests of the Spanish conquerors. Remember, the Spanish conquerors, the ones who were in charge, those type of Spanish were the Catholics, Roman Catholic Empire. And they were using many of these Sephardic Moorish people as servants, as their navigators, as their interpreters, port Jews, as their traders with the Indians, as their plantation operating owners, all that. So they were serving the Spanish conquerors and were rewarded with gold and indigenous slaves. Yeah, more and more war. They were also in it too. Just because they were being put under this so-called bondage doesn't make them likely to not go enslave somebody else. I don't know the reasons why, if somebody was in bondage, why they go do it to another person. But I guess survival was survival at that time, right? Survival for your family and your people, right? The Spanish elite in Puerto Rico and Hispaniola gathered financial resources and arms to engage in the capture of the indigenous population. Vaquianos, hunters, and guides with an intimate knowledge of indigenous settlements were dedicated to hunting and capturing Carib slaves. Expeditions to Lucayas, the Bahamas. We already got the description of the Caribs. We know they were so-called black. We got the description of the Lucayans. We know they were swarthy, so-called dark complexion people as well. The Cumana, the Lesser Antilles, and the South American coast resulted in the enslavement and death of huge segments of indigenous populations. Who were the Spanish and Portuguese really enslaving? American Indians when they were over here, by hundreds of thousands of them. They didn't all go extinct, all right? They want you to believe that. A lot of them were put into these plantations. They have descendants today. They're being called Latinos, or so-called Black or African Americans. Records provide us with accounts of free Black men who established themselves within the military and obtained fortunes. All right, free Black men who obtained fortunes, right, by conquering you, right, American Indians, as they joined the European colonizers in the exploitation of the Americas. Right. So again, let me reword that because I don't want to say conquering you, because you could be the Sephardic you conquer, and you could also be the American Indian getting conquered. Yeah, you have both genealogies. Most of you that are hearing me right now, whether you want to believe it or not. So it's going to list a couple of these so-called Black conquistadors or auxiliaries. It says ante Mexia. Look at that, Mexia or Mexia. Remember, he's a Spaniard with that surname Mexia, which is coming from. Could it have some links to ancient America? Quite possibly. Antoine Mejia, a free Black man, provided services to Nicolas de Ovando, governor of Hispaniola, and an assistant to crossbowmen. He was later listed as an encomendero, meaning a slave master. An encomendero was a slave master. Comendero got an encomienda, meaning a grant, a land grant. An encomienda was a land grant that you had to have. Basically, the main reason for an encomienda was to establish a plantation with slaves or with free labor. That was the whole purpose of an encomendero. That was his title. That was his job. Encomendero engaged in the extraction of precious metals with 3 indigenous slaves. His son, Francisco Mejia, gained prominence as a soldado, as a soldier, a cazador de fortuna, and as a hunter of fortune, whatever that means. That sounds like killing Indians to me. Engaging in battles against the indigenous population, like I just said. Who? Free Black people. Free Black, so-called Black. Free Black people killing who? Indigenous populations. More and more war. You gotta understand. Right? And don't think this is only happening in Mexico and the Caribbean and the Spanish and Portuguese only are doing this. No. We have already gone Francis Drake, right? Check out the previous videos, right? Francis Drake, who were these English? Who were these Irish? Who were these Huguenots? Let's not forget. There's no way of running or escaping this. Eventually, it's going to get to your genealogy some way if you're in the Americas. If you're from the Americas, there's no way from running from this. What we have to do is embrace this and learn who we are, understand our genealogy. They told us a lot of things. They lied to us. They made up so much things that we got so much confusion, and we just generalize here and generalize that way. So again, we got these Mexias, free Black Ladinos, Europeans who are doing this for the indigenous population. Was a noted slave catcher, right? The Mexias, most likely Sephardic Jews, Moors. The Mexias, who are Moors, Moorish people, were noted slave catchers. He hunted down and captured Carib slaves for price. Testimony regarding the services of Mejia revealed that for 1 year he was contracted for 44 pesos de oro to capture caciques and indios. Caciques, chiefs, and indios. He was contracted beginning November 8, 1512, in an attempt to obtain indigenous laborers from the Cacica Luisa, a female queen, a female leader. He was reportedly killed by Caribs in 1513. That's what you get, man. Caribs don't play, right? Caribs don't play for real, because Caribs were doing their own invasion before the Europeans arrived. Oh, let's not forget about that history. But yeah, that's, again, more and more war. Before even the Europeans got here. If we're talking about complexion. His father, Anton Mejia, appealed to the authorities for payment due for his son's services. It is interesting to know that Puerto Rican historians have romanticized Mejia's untimely death among the Taíno, the indigenous Arawakan-speaking people of Puerto Rico, by arguing that in act of courage, Mejia attempted to protect the Cacica Luisa from the warring Caribs. So yeah, they made up that history. He was actually trying to enslave everybody. He ain't trying to be friendly with nobody. They're letting you know. They made up that whole thing. Now, continuing real quick, it says, in addition to the importation of these free men, Black Ladinos, Black Ladinos were imported as domestic servants. Who was the real servants? Indentured servants, encomiendas, producers of subsistence crops. Black Ladinos, Europeans, laborers in the sugar ingenious, 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 and extractors of gold. They were really good at sugar plantation and extracting gold. Who? The Moors, of course. Sephardic Moriscos, cryptos. They were really good at that. Ladinos were often preferred over indigenous slaves as skilled manual laborers, given their previous experience in the Iberian Peninsula. Who were they before they got to America? They already had the metalworking, the goldsmithing, all that, the trade. They knew all that already. States the Spanish crown did not initially intend to transport African slaves to the New World. All right, what? Who said that? Via Solar states that the Spanish crown did not initially intend to transport African slaves to the New World. So when Charles V, a so-called black man, Charles V, all right, Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, all right, Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, Catholic, Roman Catholic. The Catholics weren't just white. I get, sometimes I just want to address, I'm glad I remembered. So, after my videos are done and completed, I get a lot of people, but the Romans this and the Romans were white, and you guys not understanding. It's not a black and white thing. It has nothing to do with that yet. Not in the 1500s, not in the 1400s, not in the 1600s, not even in the 1700s, maybe in the 1800s. We start actually getting into something like that. 1900s mostly. Charles V, right? Charles V, right? Who also comes up in that painting from Peru. That's him right there. He was actually next to all the caciques, as you can see him right here. Carlos Quinto or Charles V. Quinto means fifth. Carlos is Charles, anglicized. All right, so-called black man. And who were the Incas? So-called black men too. Again, more on more. War, right? So again, Charles V, he said, hey, I'm going to give you guys permission. We're talking about a black man. So when he's saying you can grab 4,000 Negroes when he himself is a so-called Negro, Negro means something else. And he was talking about these Ladinos and the Indians he had because why? Dia Solar states that the Spanish crown did not initially intend to transport African slaves to the New World. The Spanish crown, this guy right here, he didn't intend to go to Africa to transport so-called slaves to America. It was the Ladinos and the people he already had under his control or bondage, which were American indigenous people. Since the time Columbus and them came, they already doing it. All right? It wasn't Africans. Repetitive information hopefully sticks to you. However, by 1501, the crown had authorized the importation of black slaves. The instructions sent to Nicolas de Ovando stated that Moors, Jews, or persons recently Christianized could not travel to the Americas, with the exception of Spanish-born and Christianized slaves, Ladinos. Except the Ladinos, not the ones who are converted. The enslaved Ladino was forced to work side by side with the indigenous slaves in the extraction of mineral resources. Again, who were these so-called black Europeans working with side by side? Indigenous slaves. Where's the Africans? Where's the Africans? I'm asking you right now, listening to this. Where's the Africans? In the extraction of mineral resources. Sued Badillo argues that the rigor and vicissitudes of mining life influenced the two Ladino uprisings in Puerto Rico. In 1503, Nicolas de Ovando requested that the Ladino population be barred from entering the Americas. Why? Because upon their arrival, guess what they were doing? These Ladinos. I'm a black Europeans, right? They joined the Indians and became fugitives from the law. Can I get a Maroon Can I get a Maroon? Can I get a hashtag Maroons? Who's the Maroons? Who's these Marranos, Maroons? Who's these runaways? Yo, this whole time they were telling us in school that all these so-called Negro were Africans, right? And they were escaping and running away and becoming the more Maroons community, the Maroonish community. Well, we know that they were, but they were actually European. They were mixing with indigenous populations, and the indigenous people were helping them get to their locations. Because again, these are Europeans. They didn't know the land. They needed help from the Ladinos. They were marrying with them, joining forces with them. All right? However, by 1505, Obando had requested that the importation of Ladinos be reestablished in Hispaniola. Ladinos joined forces with the Arawak population in an effort to overthrow Spanish rule, meaning the Catholics, because Ladinos are Spanish. They ain't Africans. In 1514, a hurricane devastated the island. Food supplies were scarce. The availability of indigenous labor declined, and the Ladinos were forced to work in the mines. They were forced to work in the mines. Who's, again, being enslaved? They were forced to work in the mines. Within the context, the Maroon emerged, right where I was getting to, right? Within this context, the Maroon emerged. According to Richard Price, the word cimarron has Arawak roots, right? We know it means quick like an arrow, or as fast and lethal as an arrow, right? Unstoppable, sharp, very precise. You know, they can't get it too fast. So it's an Arawak roots word. The Spaniards adopted the word to refer to feral domestic cattle that had taken to the hills. Oh my gosh, in Hispaniola. And soon after, the term was applied to escaped Indian slaves, right? By the end of the 1530s, it was beginning to refer primarily to so-called African Americans that had strong connotations to fierceness of being feral, wild, or untamed. So what? Look how it went from the Maroons, it went from the Ladinos escaping, mixing with the Indians, to just the Indians being called that, to then what? To African Americans. They were the Maroons. What African? Untamed, wild, feral. Where's any of that mean African? Although the indigenous population declined precipitously, indigenous people continued to wage war against the Spanish colonies. The forces of nature provided them with the opportunity to weaken the Spanish stronghold. Albeit temporarily, in 1530, a hurricane again devastated the island of Puerto Rico, destroying haciendas and the natives in cooperation with runaway African slaves. That's a hijack. He just told us it was Ladinos. What Africans? When did they come in? You haven't told us. You haven't given us a source for the Africans yet. When you just told us it was black Ladinos and free black men that were coming. When did you show us a source for a ship coming from Africa? When did that happen? That never did happen. So that's the hijack right there, guys. This time, not even the dogs were spared. In 1531, a second major uprising occurred involving the enslaved black population. This represented a greater threat to the colonizers because the number of people of color had increased while the white population had decreased. What white population? You're talking about Puerto Rico? In the 1500s? Are you serious? A white population in Puerto Rico in the 1500s, when you got all these Spaniards, Portuguese, and Indians. What white people? All right, so we're going to continue. It says here, this is from Léxico Hispanoamericano del Siglo. It's like a dictionary, encyclopedia kind of words. Right here it says Ladino. It says in Cuba, El Negro. Ladino, El Negro, Ladino. Que truce me sirve de todo. Negros, Ladinos. All right, Negro, Ladino. Also, it says here, más mandados que los blancos. It says that these Negro Ladinos were being sent more than the whites. Más mandados que los blancos. For the horses. By the language of Joanne, Indian Ladino, who speak Spanish and Indian or Ladino, right? They're speaking the Ladino when they were mixing in, learning Ladino from the Spaniards when they were coming here. Right? Just wanted to show that. There's a lot of correlation. I'm not just making this up. Now I wanted to show you this. This is from I found this on this Black Ladinos all the way in the bottom. This is from way back, way back. So this is Hermandad Los Negritos, the Brotherhood of Los Negritos, or the Little Blacks. It's a secret society in Spain, and guess what? It's actually the oldest secret society in Spain from the 1400s, before the cathedral in Seville was even built. All right, how do I know that? Go to history. All right, now let's go. The antiquity of the Brotherhood and the documentation of this. All right. Okay, let me just copy. All right, we're gonna go to Google Translate. All right, detected, Spanish. Now it says here, the long century and a half that goes from the last decade of the that's the 14th to the approval of the rule of 1554 constitutes what we would call the dark years of the Brotherhood. Years coinciding with the time covered by Professor Alonso Franco and his invaluable collaboration on the preceding pages, in the light of which it is now possible to interpret the testimonies and references that have come down to us regarding the Brotherhood. Few in number, and the majority of them indirect or coming from later times, although relatively close to those early times, but which together support the idea that as a brotherhood which is known since Ricardo White's time, in the second half of the 700s, as de los Negritos, or of the blacks, or little blacks, is today the oldest of the many that have managed to reach our days. We're talking about the oldest secret society, the oldest brotherhood society in Spain. Listen to this. Since it was founded before 1400, talking about sometime before, it could have been 1300s, 1200s. What? The Brotherhood of Los Negritos, of the blacks. At a historical moment when the construction of the cathedral had not even been agreed upon by the Church of Seville, it continued to be located in the Almohad Greater Mosque, Christianized with the name of Santa Maria. All right, let's go back. Just want to keep reading this. All right. I'm going to translate this for you guys. It says, for referring to a corporation that has always been modest and still very humble during its first 500 years, for belonging to black ethnicity. Belonging to what? Black ethnicity. The Morenos, the Moors, the Moreno. Moreno. Tú eres moreno. Tú eres un moreno. Yo soy moreno. Tú eres un moreno. Right? Morenos. Who's the Morenos? During his first 500 years, listen to this, people. First 500 years, this society belonged to the black ethnicity, the Morenos, generically connotados or connotating with the stigma of slavery. They put the stigma. They're trying to let you know, because this is not translating it good. What it's trying to say is they were put on this stigma, this tag of slavery, where really its components are the situation of servitude or enjoy legal freedom. And in the last hundred for being the brotherhood of a modest extramural neighborhood, inhabited until not long ago for workers and marginalized people. This antiquity has always been discussed by other brotherhoods, and for not few authors belonging or at the service of castes highs of the city, who consider it decorous for them that of blacks occupy a place of honor in the frequent general processions in the city. As we will see, the civilian blacks always defended firmly the privileges. Civilian blacks from Seville, Spain, Ladinos, Sephardic Jews. Seville was a major slave port, as they would call it, of American Indians. Yeah. And the Ladinos who were being sent out of there. And guess who was the port in? It was poor Jews who controlled that trade. always defended firmly the privileges that the Brotherhood was entitled by its antiquity, including by strong economic sacrifices for it, engaged in lawsuit against powerful brotherhoods, and even reaching the highest ecclesiastical instances to Rome itself with his arguments. They might have even become popes. They're letting you know the drop right there. But it belonged to who? Ethnically, the Morenos for the first 500 years. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to show today, good thing I had this up, was the caste system or the caste paintings from colonial Mexico, which show many prominent people of color in European clothes, you know, intermarrying with light-skinned people, with Indians, with other people, even Filipino people that were black as well. And, you know, they had different labels. All right. See in the top here, we got these two colored people. Again, dodge the hijack. A lot of these are not freed Africans. A lot of these are actual Europeans, Spanish, Portuguese who arrived in Mexico. Sephardic Jews, Muslim Moors, yes, conquistadors, yes, colonists who got with other people from their own country or culture, or Indians, or even some of the Filipino people that were there. All right, another couple here, a colored lady with a pale-skinned person here, dark skin and pale. All right, you see a lot of different cultures, a melting pot already in Mexico. Now I want you to pay attention. Look at the Indians. Check out the Indians. Check out how they painted the Indians right here, guys. You see what they got here as the Indians? All right, what do you see there? Now look at this. This is a European, all right, or Mexican citizens, right to the right of them. Right on the left, these are all colored people, right? Right? These are all colored people. Which one do you descend from? Only the Indian one? You only descend from the Indian one? Is that the one you only want to claim? Well, that's all right. You can just claim that. You might descend from this guy here on the right, or this lady right here, his wife, or this guy right here on the left of them, or his wife, too. All right? Get what I'm trying to show you guys? This is from Mexico. They won't show you this in school. These are Mexicans. This is in Mexico. Where's all the white people? Look, who's getting married? Who's in the caste system? Who got European clothes on? Who's the Indian? Who's the Indian? Who's the Europeans? It's deep. It's really deep like that. All right? We got to dodge the hijack. We got to embrace all our lines. All right? Mexico was already a melting pot in colonial times, man. What do we have here? This is in Spain too. Negro with a mulata. And they get a sambo. So a Negro with a mulata, you get a sambo. You see? See what I'm trying to show you guys here, right? Shout out to the Mexicans who painted this for keeping history alive, all right? Negro. Uh-oh. We're just talking about the caste system here in Mexico. The caste system here in Mexico. And there's hundreds of these paintings. You know, you guys can just love and check them out yourself. It says here the Negro y the India. A Negro and an Indian. Look at that. And what's going on? Are they beefing? Is he beating on her? Man, what's up with this dude, man? All right, now we got here a pale-skinned dude with his, you know, dark-skinned wife. So it says Espanol, a Spaniard with the Jewish nose could be Turkish, could be North African, Muslim, Jewish, Sephardic, Turkish, right? I'm just saying, you know. And it says they got a mulatto. All right. And now we go to this one. All right, so you guys can see this was happening. It says de India y Cambujo, gente en el aire. An Indian, right? And a Cambujo. Whatever that means. You guys can Google it. It'll probably try to explain to you the what it means, on Google. But gotta touch the hijack always. Make sure we understand what we're reading. When we read these things, especially like even in North America, mulatto, quadroon, all that stuff. Gotta dodge the hijack a lot of the times. All right. Again, these are Mexicans, Mexican families right here. All right. See this guy with his European outfit, very European outfit. Mixture, a lot of mixing going on, right? But if he's living as a free man in Mexico and he's African, why isn't he dressed in his African attire? Why doesn't he teach his African culture? Why is he looking like a European to me? Why is he looking like a European to me? I'm just saying. We are reading about Sephardic, Moorish, Europeans, right? Who's the Huguenots? Who's all these people? All right, the India right there. India. Look at the India. The Indio. Y Cambujanase. Indio y Cambajunase, whatever that means. All right. Again, make sure. Wow, she had a really light-skinned baby. His genes are strong, man. All right, so I just wanted to show that. And again, who's Charles V? And who's Prester John? Who's Charles V? All right, that was great. We're going to go back to the book. We're reading from the book, A Genealogical History, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America. Elizabeth Hirschman and Donald Yates as the authors. We're going to go into the Canary Islands now. Again, we're in the book, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, A Genealogical History. All right, we're in chapter 2 of this book. The Canaries started out as a crypto-Jewish refuge. Why are we learning about the Canaries, Kurimeo? Well, that's why. Because the Canaries started out as a crypto-Jewish refuge, similar to the island of Leghorn in Italy, where the bishop designated to provide spiritual guidance to the venture was Alberto de las Casas. Like Betancourt, a Sephardic patronym. All right? Betancourt is Sephardic. Betancourt, Sephardic. And again, de las Casas. Remember, there was another famous de las Casas who wrote some books, right? Cruelty of local Spanish. He was what? He was really Sephardic. He was a crypto. From its inception, the community has strong ties to Marrano and other crypto Jews in southern France and Britain. Crypto Jews in France, southern France. Guess who's there? Huguenots. They're the crypto Jews in southern France, especially in Plymouth, Bristol, and southwestern Scotland. So remember, we went over this and that how many crypto Jews and Moors were heading over to England. We know Bristol was a town that was, let me just show you again. Got the book right here. As it says here, the black population of Bristol in the 18th century. Who was the main people doing trade there? Who was getting all these so-called free labor slaves, so-called Negro people to work as so-called slaves or servants? And who were these people in Bristol? Were they really Africans? Again, from its inception, the community has strong ties to Marrano and other crypto Jews in southern France, Britain, especially in Plymouth and Bristol, who has a black population, right? And Liverpool too. We're gonna get into those two cities, and southwestern Scotland. By the 1500s, the New Canarians were numerous enough to provide settlers for Spain's colonies in the New World. So they grew there. The Sephardic Jews, this crypto people, grew in numbers in the Canary Islands. And then they were ready to go where? To the New World. The Canaries served as a proven ground for most of the institutions later introduced to the Americas. Pay attention. What started and by who? The plantation economy. The plantation economy, an emphasis on cash crops, such as sugarcane, slavery, military conquest, and the extermination of native peoples under the pretext of conversion. extermination of native people. Who was Sephardic Jews? Who started that? Sephardic, crypto, Moorish, Spaniards, and Portuguese. All right? It's not a white thing. This ain't a white master thing. After prospering in the Canaries, we got this in my previous videos, Nations of the World, right? Who set up the sugar, where they went. They became the poor Jews. They became very famous in these Brazilian sugar plantations in the Canaries, in Sao Tome, off of Guinea. That was all Sephardic Jews and Indians they were sending over there. And Moors, after they were being expelled by the Catholics, they were being sent to Santa Tome Island off the coast of Africa. They did a whole reversal of history. We're just trying to overstand it right now. Again, after prospering the Canaries, several families moved on to Hispaniola. After they prospered, right? They went to where? Haiti, Hispaniola, Santo Domingo, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and St. Augustine. Over 4,000 Canarians ventured to Louisiana. In 1778. 1778. All right? It says here they also settled in Venezuela, in Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Paraguay. Many of these Canary Island descendants now claim Sephardic ancestry. It says the Azores are situated northwest of the Canary Islands, where the easterly North Atlantic Current turns about and becomes the Canaries Current. They are an ideal return harbor and restocking point for North Atlantic trade vessels. Unlike the Canaries, they were uninhabited when the Portuguese arrived in the 1400s. Perhaps owing to the inhospitable volcanic nature of their creation, they were colonized first in 1439 by people drawn from the Spanish provinces of Algarve and Alentejo. In the following centuries, settlers from other European countries arrived, most notably from northern France and Flanders. All right, Flemish people. These people, a lot of them, very melanated, swarthy complexion people. The islands became home to several ecclesiastical seminaries and were placed under the governance of the hereditary counts of Villafranca, who were descended from Rui Gonzalez de Cámara. Most of the inhabitants made their living as farmers, fishermen, and merchants. Merchants, remember who's the merchants? Key word. It was a specific people who had that profession, mainly Sephardic Jews, Muslim Moors. In the 1700s, the economy turned to the production of citrus, especially oranges. Apparently in 1890, these groves were destroyed by parasites. The Azores had also had lucrative cloth dyeing trade with Britain during the 1600s. What British people? 1600s. Remember when we were talking about Raleigh, Francis Drake, De la Raleigh, De la Raleigh. That was a Sephardic Jewish name. These were people of color. What British? What English? All right, so they're doing trade with their own people. That's what they mean. Port Jews doing trade with other port Jews living in England, known as British, and here known as, I guess, Azorian people or Azores, right? But it's all the same people. They control the ports. Remember, let's not forget the past presentations. All right. Communities of port Jews and their contacts in the Dutch Atlantic world. Communities, again, in the late 16th century, Jews and conversos, cryptos, Sephardic people of color, created a trading network that tied together ports in Portugal, Brazil, and the Netherlands. This network became the chief Dutch commercial circuit in the first quarter of the 17th century and offered benefits to Jews and conversos that were not solely economic ones. The circuit made it possible for Brazilian new Christians, right? Remember, with a new Christian, there was just Muslim converts, Sephardic Jewish converts into Christianity. They were called new Christians, but they were really Protestants, and Protestants only because they didn't want to be Catholics. They created all these other tax denominations, so-called religions. New Christians to return to Judaism in Amsterdam, and Amsterdam Jews to establish a community in Brazil. Remember, these Amsterdam Jews we're talking about, again, I'm going to repeat it, Sephardic Jews, Moorish people of color, They created their New Jerusalem in Amsterdam, where they were very prosperous during their days as Dutch, during their days as the Dutch. All right, so this is real history. Just want to make sure you guys understand why they're doing business with all those ports in Europe. In 1640, the British traders were represented by Matthew Godwin, Philip Palgrave, and Christopher Williams. And in 1669, we find the names of John and William Chamberlain, together with John Stone, all gentlemen said to be very Portuguese, that is, Jewish. All gentlemen said to be very Portuguese, that is, Jewish. So who's the Portuguese Jews? They're very dark-skinned people. We're talking about so-called Negro with Portuguese wives. There are also French traders, Christopher and Jean Bresson and Bernard. Several Huguenot. Who's the Huguenots? Businessmen based in La Rochelle had interest in the Azores. A lot of Huguenots in the Azores. Huguenots, including Marrano Labat family, including the Marrano Labat family, Marranos Labat family who helped settle French Canada. Louis de la Ronde, Hermigo Nolet, and Antoine Sivuri, one Abraham Vogler, right? Vogler, seller of birds, Ashkenazi, served as combined Swedish, Danish, Dutch, Hamburg, and Spanish council. It's all the same people. We just talking about Moors, some more Moors, some more Moors. The Azores have been documented as having significant converso population. Although the first phase of Jewish influence is usually glossed over, all but one of the surnames included in the Azores project examined here were judged to be probably Sephardic. Some of the names we can point to with certainty as Sephardic are Borges or Burgess, right? I had a teacher, Mr. Burgess. Now I know he was Sephardic. Betancourt, Pereira. So yeah, famous name there says Pires, De Mel, De Souza, Fernandez Oliveira, Magellan, Pepom, and Rosa. It says these findings strengthen the supposition that there was significant Sephardic Moorish presence on the islands. I am the last Jew in all of the Azores. Jorge Del Mar told a travel reporter in 2010. 30 years ago, there were 16 Jewish families on this island. Del Mar said, the import-export businessman said, the Azores used to have a community of Jews who held services in the old synagogue. It made all of the festivities in my grandfather's house. All the others, he said, have died, converted, or moved away. He is the only one left. His one-man history of the Jewish Azores starts with the Ben Saudis. The Ben Saudis, the sons of the Saudis, Ben Saudi, right? Who had the trade connections that enabled them to link England. Again, a link, right? Who had trade networks. We're talking about poor Jews, family ties with England, Brazil, and Newfoundland. Newfoundland, right? Nova Scotia. Who's the Acadians, all right? That might be my next video, guys. I'll do a video on the Acadians. Why? Because the Acadians is another very important history and genealogy in Americans. When they had their own diaspora. And yes, many were Swarty, so-called Swarty, who had trade connections again with the Azores. And names Luna Bernaros, a luxury innkeeper on the island of Fayal, who maintains her father and grandfather's sidrus, haggadahs, and other mementos of a Jewish past and an antique oak cabinet. We are not aware of any data for the Madeiras, all right? These are the closest of all the Atlantic islands to Portugal and were first settled in 1419 before the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisitions and expulsion of Jews from Iberia. According to Mordecai Arbel, author of the Jewish Nation of the Caribbean, they figure later as an important haven for Sephardim and serve as a natural stepping stone to the Americas. At first, the new settlers were primarily petty criminals, but under Manuel I, new Christians or Conversos began to pour into the colony. By the end of the 16th century, however, after various attacks by the local bishop and rectors of the Jesuit college at Funchal, all right, Catholics, they were beefing with Catholics. Why? New Christians. Why are new Christians beefing with Jesuit priests? Wouldn't they be the same people? No, these are Muslims and Sephardic Jews beefing against the Catholics. Who's the Jesuit Moravians? Who's these Moravian Jesuit Catholic Cathars priests? Who is the Batukan, Holy Roman, Edomian, Edomite Empire. Jews forsook the islands for Amsterdam and Brazil. The famous Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel was probably born in the Madeira archipelago. Manasseh ben Israel, we've gone over him before, what he was saying about the Indians. He was literally, I think he had a printing company up in Amsterdam. He was printing these books, The Hope of Israel, he wrote. He was saying how word was coming back from New England, right, from Massachusetts, that they had run into the lost tribes they had found, the lost tribes of Israel. He was printing that. This guy, Manasseh ben Israel, a Sephardic Jew, right, and his buddies were saying that they had found the lost tribes in Massachusetts and that they would need a large undertaking, a very large undertaking to convert them, to convert Jewish Indians, to convert Jewish Indians into Christianity. All right, that's from the 1600s, when the Jews who pioneered these processes moved on to Brazil at the invitation of the Portuguese governor Duarte Coelho Pereira. Their expertise went with them. All right, very dark skin. Remember, the Portuguese Pereiras were very dark skinned Jews, the Portuguese Jews, the Pereira family, so-called Negroes. That's a hijack when you think of white people or white Spaniards, conquistadors. That's your own hijack. We're about to go into Cuba. Columbus arrived in Cuba on his first voyage in 1492 and found 3 different native peoples dwelling there: Taínos, Siboneyes, and Guanahatabeyes. Estimates of the indigenous population at time ranged from 50,000 to 300,000. Over the next 7 decades, most of the original inhabitants died out due to virulent epidemics and the unstinging warfare brought on by the incoming Europeans. What Europeans? Huh? And did they really all die out? That's a hijack on that. We still here, baby. Yeah, we still here. The first Spanish settlement was established in 1511 by Diego Velázquez, who served as governor until 1524. Cuba's early population was quite mixed, consisting of 7,000 persons in 1544, of whom 600 were Spanish, 800 were African slaves, or, black Ladinos. Remember, it wasn't Africans they were bringing. What Africans? Show me the proof they were African. They're just saying people of color. They're just calling them African because they're dark complexion. Remember what we learned earlier about the black Ladinos. Who were they really sending to replace the Amerindians and the remainder Indians and mulattoes? So look, 800 weren't just Africans, slaves. They were included also the Indians and the mulattoes. All right, so they mixed in all these people of color together and tagging them African, Indians, and mulattoes. They didn't call themselves that. The primary economic activity at first was shipbuilding. Who built the ships? By the early 1700s, the focus had shifted to tobacco, with sugarcane plantations and cattle ranches also remaining prominent. Who grew tobacco? A large-scale population disruption occurred in 1762 when British forces attacked and occupied Havana, one of the major cities of New Spain. When they say British forces, they're talking about pirates, Sephardic Jewish pirates. Let's not forget that they had a personal vendetta against the Spanish. Remember, they were not just English, they were Sephardic Jews who had been in England for many centuries. They were Moorish people that had been in England for many centuries, a lot of them, or even just gotten there recently. And they had a very hatred towards the Spanish Catholics because they were burning and hanging their people, burning them at the stake and beheading them and doing very awful things to their own people, to their people. That's why these so-called British forces, that's why they're not telling you straight up British, but British forces, forces who worked for Britain, right? British forces, pirates, attacked and occupied Havana, one of the major cities of New Spain. The island's governor, Juan de Parado, most of the Spanish administrators, and the peninsulares fled en masse. After 11 months of British rule, which opened the island to trade with North America and England, Cuba was ceded back to Spain in exchange for Florida. All right, you see that history? Hey, I'll give you Florida, give us back Cuba, man. Come on. We like Cuba. Come on, we give you Florida. All right, you can keep Florida. You got the other states there. You know, give us Cuba, man. So, you see what happened? Subsequently, the slave population of Cuba increased dramatically, growing from 44,000 by 1774. By 1791, at which time Florida was again in Spanish hands. So the Spanish took it back. The number of slaves had reached 84,000, most of them being employed in sugarcane. Remember who they were sending to the sugar plantations? We got this already. And it wasn't just Sephardic Jews or Moors being sent over there. We got a lot of the Irish, the Black Irish, a lot of the, remember, there were a lot of these indentured servants. That same year, a slave rebellion on Santo Domingo, Haiti, Hispaniola, caused many French sugar planters to flee to Cuba. All right, among the major sugar magnates at the time were Francisco de Arronga, Conde de Casa Montalvo, and Jose Ricardo O'Farrell, an Irishman. Irishman, like I said, Irishman. Did he gain his freedom and got his own land in Cuba? This Irishman? Cuba DNA shows that the classic European components of the population is even higher than in the Canary Islands and Azores, even higher, comprising nearly 3/4 of all males, providing additional support for the proposal that the characteristic Sephardic Jewish lineage is R&B, not J. It's European. It's European, not Middle Eastern. It's European. It's European. That's the European component. Not white people, but colored black Europeans. Jewish, Moorish. Surnames echo those of the Canaries and Azores. Among those carried by Converso or Morisco families are Cruz, Cross, Perez, Banos, Jewish and Moorish. All right, Banos is Jewish and Moorish depending on the branch. Betancourt, Reyes or Royal, Almora, the Moor, Almora, Almora, the Moor, Almora, the Moor, Batista, Baptist, Jean-Baptiste Batista, Juan de Batista, Carbajo o Caballo, Carrillo, Correa, Diaz, Duarte, Elizondo, Marinas, Ferro, blacksmith, a Jewish dominant craft, Ferro or Farrar, Ferro, Farrar, blacksmith, Galvez, Garcia, Guzman, Maria, Martin, Moreira, Moreira, Moore, Moreira, Moore, Morena, Morena, Ortega, Romero, Salvador, Xavier, Sanchez, perhaps originally the same as Cohen, priest, holy man, Sardinas, from Sardinia, Valdez, and Villarreal, royal house. Now it says here, Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is located in the Caribbean Sea, not far from Cuba, Jamaica, and Hispaniola. The island was settled by indigenous peoples of the archaic culture of the West Indies in the 1st century CE or earlier, around 120. The second group of natives representing the Arawak culture reached the island, perhaps from South America. By 100 CE, Taínos established themselves on Puerto Rico. They had a well-developed language and civilization, as well as advanced agricultural practices. Europeans came to Puerto Rico in 1493 with the second voyage of Columbus, and in 1508, Juan de Leon founded the first permanent settlement, all right, Ponce de Leon. Natives were forced into servitude or hunted down and killed, resulting in a devastating collapse of the local population and culture. All right, so I just wanted to add, you know, that this Ponce de Leon eventually went to go look for the Fountain of Youth, in La Florida. So remember, La Florida was most of the southeast U.S., not just the state of Florida. And what I wanted to emphasize is that when he brought up his so-called servants or slaves, again, a lot of these were Indians. What they're saying here, natives were forced into servitude. So it correlates with the past info that I've correlated, showing that he was enslaved in Arawak and Caribs, right? They already had the Sephardic Jewish people as servants too, but they added the Indian element and they brought all these people up to La Florida, right? And La Florida, they were calling them, well, in history, they were saying that they were bringing up Africans or black people. But then then at the same time, they won't accept that this was before 1619. Yeah, this was 1500, before the so-called first 20 Negro. No, there was already so-called other so-called Negroes being brought up, because there was already Negroes in America. It was in the 1500s and 1400s, way before 1619. So it's a whole big lie. They have to create lies on top of lies. And until we really do the research, it makes sense to us. Until we actually do the research, then it doesn't make sense. Then we see it's all just a little cover up, because I know people ain't this unintelligent and this unaware of things, you know what I mean, of a history. So it's purposely done. That's my point. All right. So I just wanted to emphasize that Ponce de Leon, we're talking about him right here, right? Putting the natives in servitude. Ponce de Leon, colored people, right? More and more war. As in other colonies, it was the native men and their male lineages that bore the brunt of this. DNA samples collected on the island clearly show that Taino ancestry survives through the female line, whereas male line go the way of the Canaries and other conquered lands. The male line is not in Puerto Rico. They got sent out somewhere, huh? They might end up in other conquered lands, where that could be North America, that could be Central America, that could even be Africa. Puerto Rico was a favorite place for the Spanish to send native slaves captured in the Carolinas. All right? So again, where's all the Africans? We're getting natives sent up to La Florida, and now we're getting Indians from the Carolinas. What are we talking about here? Siouan, Catawba, Cherokee. What are we talking about? 5 civilized tribes. What are we talking about? What kind of tribes being sent to Puerto Rico? What is the connection? Many of these Indians escaped into the hills, and their descendants remain there today. Like I said, a lot of those Maroons weren't even African or even black Europeans. A lot of them were other Indians. All right? But again, we don't generalize. We got to go case by case. We might find out who they were if we actually take the time to research the history. Because many of them escaped to the hills too, just like the black Ladinos, right? With the local population, and became Maroons too. The Puerto Rican indigenous haplotype pattern is especially diverse, right? Many different indigenous people in Puerto Rico. It's very diverse, because a lot of Indians got sent there from all over the Americas, you see? And the DNA kind of proves it a little bit. Owing to its central location, Puerto Rico was subjected to repeated depredations by French, English, and Portuguese privateers / pirates. We were talking about earlier. All these people were pirates. A fort was built by the Spanish settlers from 1530 to 1540 to defend the island, right? They mean by the Catholics, to defend it from the Protestants, from the Jews, from the Muslims, Huguenots, and so on and so on. All right? Spanish officials on the island during the late 1500s included the following: Menendez de Valdez, Pedro Suarez, Pedro Tejo de Guzman, Pardo de Osorio, Antonio Calderón, Antonio Mosquero, and Juan de Haro. These surnames further suggest that the island was Sephardic and Moorish community. The island was Sephardic and Moorish. Sephardic and Moorish community. Again, Sephardic and Moorish. Puerto Rico, Sephardic and Moorish. We still see the Moorish architecture there today. The Spanish Sephardic Moorish architecture in the colonial parts of it. Mosquera, for example, is clearly Islamic. Mosquera is Islamic. Settlers in Puerto Rico were mainly drawn from Castile, with some Italians, some Portuguese, and Flemish. Remember, a lot of most of these people are probably people of color. Remember the Italians? We got the descriptions of the Flemish and Italians, the original Italians, in my Swarty Europe video. 3 parts. Make sure to watch those 3 videos, that series, if you haven't. Were some of these friends or relatives of Spanish Jews? Yes. By the late 1500s, Canary Islanders and additional Portuguese settlers had arrived. In 1683, 200 or more Canarian families came to Puerto Rico, followed by another 300 in 1691. Remember who the Canarian families were? These were all Moorish Sephardic people. These arrivals shifted the overall population of the island towards a Canarian profile. And several of the original Castilian families had moved to colonies on the mainland of the Americas or died from epidemics that periodically swept the island. The surnames in the Puerto Rico sample are strongly suggestive of Converso, Morisco, Moriscos, Spanish for Moorish, Morisco, were former Muslims. They were former Muslims, right? And their descendants whom the Roman Catholic Church and the Spanish Crown commanded to convert to Christianity. All right, convert. That's what you were asking me earlier. Why did they convert? They were made or compulsory exile from after Spain outlawed the old practice of Islam by its sizable Muslim population. The unified Portuguese and Spanish monarchs mistrusted Moriscos, all right, and feared that they would prompt new invasions from the Ottoman Caliphate. All right, Morisco. Again, Puerto Rico are strongly suggestive of Converso Morisco. The surnames, Morisco backgrounds, Bautista, Benitez, Bernal, Betancourt, Borges, Candelaria, Carrero, Casillas, Castellano, Castello, Colon, Cordova, Correa, Cruz, De Gracia, De Jesus, De la Reyes, Diaz, Espinoza, Phoebus, Farabus, Forbes, Ferrer, Flores, Garcia, Guzman, Jimenez, Leon, Lopez, Marrero, Mayos, Masonet, French Masonet, Medina, Arabic, Mendez, Miranda, Muniz, Navarro, Nieves, Oliveiras, Almeida, Ortega, Padilla, Pardo, Perez, Reyes, Robes, Romero, Rosie, Santiago, Santos, Vega, Llanes, and Sayas are all what? Moorish, Moors, Muslim, Morisco, Converso, names. Mexico. In 1571, King Philip II instituted an Inquisition tribunal for all of New Spain, seated in Mexico City. All right, so all of New Spain, meaning all of Central America and the southeastern U.S., the Caribbean. Its purpose was to free the land which had become contaminated by Jews and heretics. All right, so they did this Inquisition. This is like a second Inquisition. So this is after they already had done it in Portugal and Spain. There were so many Sephardic Jewish people, Moorish people, settling in the Americas and the Spanish colonies especially, because it wasn't being regulated. Well, they were the ones helping them at first, now they got too numerous, so now it was a problem. So they were saying, we got to clean this land. It's been contaminated by Jews and heretics, especially the Portuguese nation. Eloquent testimony that Mexico and the surrounding countries were havens for crypto Jews, havens for these crypto, secret Muslim, secret Jews. It says here, let me zoom in a little bit more. Crypto Jewish identity. All right, crypto Jewish identity. The Inquisition of Mexico City, right? We just read that it was crypto Jews. This article, right, we're about to read right now is going to correlate what we just read from some other people. This is by Susanne Skinner, a thesis submitted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Master of Arts in History. Utah State University. Many crypto Jews escaped the first wave, it says here, of prosecutions and ended up in the Spanish colonies in the Americas. The Inquisition also traveled across the Atlantic and continued to search for and prosecute secret Jews. We're talking about people of color here. The communities that crypto Jews formed were often found and tried in their entirety. Two of these Mexican communities we tried in 1595 and 1647 are the subjects of inquiry for this thesis. The thesis uses the records of these two crypto-Jewish communities to recreate a Mexican crypto-Jewish identity, showing that this identity was an amalgamation of Spanish, Catholic, colonial, and Jewish cultures and customs. In 1595 and 1647, two separate crypto-Jewish communities were brought before the Inquisitorial Court and tried for heresy. The community of 1595's Inquisition records include a man named Manuel de Lucena and the Carvajals, an entire family of crypto Jews. Who's the Carvajals and what do they have to do with San Antonio, Texas? The community of 1647 includes two women named Antonia Nunez and Margarita Moreira. Remember Moreira? Moore. Moreira, Moore. This thesis argues that this Mexican crypto-Jewish community created a unique identity, and it was a result of many cultural and systematic influences, including Spanish, colonial Roman, Catholic, Jewish, and early medieval gender norms. Together, these created a unique Mexican crypto-Jewish identity, and the recreation of this identity influenced religious practice, gender ideals, and the formation of racial systems. And that's what we were seeing earlier, the caste systems. All right? So letting us know, correlating with what we're reading here. All the Mexican study participants carry Hispanic surnames. Most of these are Sephardic, all right? So these Hispanic surnames, which in reality are really Sephardic, and we have seen them in other studies discussed so far: Acosta, Arevalo, Arreola, Asensio, Campos, Cervantes, Chacon, Correa, Diaz, Eliondo, Flores, Gallegos, Garcia, Herrera, Leal, Leon, Loera, Mares, Mastines, Miranda, Moreno, Nunez, Olivas, Palacios, Pena, Ramirez, Rivera, Rodriguez, Romero, Salas, Sanchez, Soto, Karen, Trevino, Vidal, Villarreal, Llanes, Ibarra. And we continue, it says here, New Mexico. The story of Jews in New Mexico begins with the establishment of the new kingdom of Leon, a large territory embracing most of present-day Tampico, Chihuahua, Nuevo Leon, Texas, Arizona, California, and New Mexico. King Philip II gave the right to colonize this vast area to a new Christian, Don Luis de Carvajal. Remember the Carvajal I was talking about? A new Christian, meaning a crypto, Muslim, Moorish, Sephardic Jewish person. His 10-year governorship ended when the Mexican Inquisition learned that many of Carvajal's colonizers were crypto Jews. So he was given the tax to help colonize parts of North America, Texas, San Antonio, New Mexico, and he was actually helping crypto families settle. And supposedly the Catholics who gave him the land grants didn't know that, right? So when they found out, he got in trouble. Again, they learned that many of Carvajal's colonizers were crypto Jews. Among the earliest settlers, first in Tampico, then in Mexico City, were Carvajal's sister, Doña Francisca, her husband, Don Francisco Rodriguez de Matos, reportedly a rabbi, and their numerous children, including Carvajal's namesake and successor, young Luis. Most of the Carvajal and Rodriguez family were prosecuted by the Inquisition, and many were burned at the stake and out to the fez, all right? Many were burned at the stake, all right? So remember what I was saying about Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, and all these people. They had a personal vendetta. They were burning at the stake their Sephardic, Moorish, Converso, crypto, and family members, cousins and all that. Their people. So they had a personal, when they were talking about raiding Spanish islands and purposely destroying the Catholic churches, it was for a reason. It was a religious war. Amahad, how you call that? What you say? Holy War? Yeah, that was back in the day. Most of the Carvajal Rodriguez family were persecuted by the Inquisition. Many were burned at the stake. Still, some of the Mexico City Converso community managed to move to New Mexico. All right. As soon as the settlement there was organized, 1598, reorganized in 1610, and once more after the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, Bernardo Lopez de Mendizábal was governor of New Mexico from 1659 to 1661, before being removed and sent back to Mexico City to answer charges for Judaizing or openly returning to Judaism. Hey, we saw you Judaizing. You're gonna get burned at the stake. One of his soldiers, Francisco Gomez Robledo, was also summoned before the Inquisition. Many, if not the vast majority of the families studied Angelico Chavez's compendium of New Mexico genealogies were originally crypto-Jewish. We're talking about people of color, yeah, crypto-Jewish people. A lot of these people became known as Creoles. A lot of these people became known as straight-up white. A lot of these people became known as straight-up Negroes or slaves. Today, a lot of them are so-called African Americans or Hispanics or even white people. You know, depending on the mixture, depending on what they claimed, who they mixed with more. In fact, it is said that there are only about 12 original families. All right? They're not there anymore. The coat of arms are still displayed on the steps of the governor's palace in Santa Fe during Spanish Market. All are intermarried in ways that are the despair of genealogists and real estate lawyers. The names are Baca, Chavez, Cruz, Duran, Garcia, Jimenez, Lopez, Lucero, Luna, Martinez, Trujillo, Sanchez, and Vigil. The mention of the name Luna brings us full circle to the conversion event in southern France, mentioned at the beginning of this chapter. Then the Luna family can be traced to a French nobleman named Bon de Lunel from a town in the kingdom of Septimania near Narbonne. Bon, for good. Received his name from the fact that his pedigree, like all Nessim Hebrew princes, was believed to go directly back to King David. All right, our Luna's R1B1 haplotype is consistent with proposals that the convert Jews of Septimania were of European, specifically Western European origin, although they believed themselves to be of Davidic, hence Middle Eastern descent. All right, so that's the hijack. So they're like, how could they be Middle Eastern if they're from Western Europe? Well, I think Western Europe is closer to the real promised land, if you ask me. Again, I think Western Europe is closer to the promised land, if you ask me, than the Middle East. We ain't talking about those fake created theme parks over there. We ain't talking about the state of blah, blah, blah. That's the country. We're not, remember, Israel is not a place. It's a nation. It's a lineage. It's a tribe. It's a people. It's not a landmass. Did I finish? Okay, so let me just finish. It says, so other forms of the good surname are Shem, Tov, Hebrew, Kalonimos, a line of rulers of Narbonne in the 10th century, Bonnet, Benetton, Italian, Kalman, German, Boone, Bowen, Dutch as in Daniel Boone. All right, Daniel Boone. Remember, Black Dutch, Daniel Boone. Who was Daniel Boone really? And I've shown this. Daniel Boone has been described as Swarty. We know he was Swarty. Daniel Boone, one of those traders? One of those fur hunter traders? Daniel Boone, the Boones, Hebrew, Jewish, Boone, for good, for bueno, bon, Boone, good or goody or goad. English intermarried with Boones in Tennessee and Buen in Spanish. Melungeon and Cumberland Gap projects. All right, Melungeons fit into this a lot. Melungeon has a lot of Sephardic Moorish ancestry in the Melungeons. A lot of the Melungeons, Black Scottish, Black Dutch, Black are those people. A lot of those people are basically Sephardic Moorish people. They just came in as Scottish. They were in Scotland. They were Scottish for many years. Some of them were straight up Sephardics from Portugal and Spain. They weren't even from Scotland. But that's not all of them. Some of them were actually from the clans, from the Irish and Scottish clans, original people of those islands as well. That were also colored people. Says here, Spain also planted colonies in Florida and the Carolinas. Yeah, they had little settlements there. As many have previously noted, Sephardic DNA profiles and surnames are still evident in the population of the lower Appalachian Mountains, notably among the Melungeons, a dark-skinned European ethnic group mixed with American Indians and Africans found dwelling there. What Africans? Show me the proof. You're just saying that because they're people of color. Well, but they may mean Muslim North Africans, so they may be right in a little bit, right? But I know they're trying to add the African slaves to add the color. I know that's why they're doing it. Found dwelling there when the first English settlers crossed the Blue Ridge into the Cherokee territory in the 1600s. Melungeon Y chromosome data invoked the Cuban pattern with R1b again for outstripping all the other haplogroups. Several J and E3b participants have Ashkenazi Jewish matches, while a number of R1 males have matches in South and Central America and the Caribbean, all suggesting Sephardic ancestry. Selected surnames from the author's project appear below. Right, so you see when they're doing all these DNA matching and all that, when we're talking about relation, we're not talking about ancestry, we're talking about relation. All right, relation, I guess, through a Y chromosome. In this case, says the much larger Cumberland Gap Y chromosome data echo these results and indicate that both Appalachian populations, which overlap to some degree, incorporate a combination of Sephardic and Ashkenazic Jewish ancestry. Melungeon mitochondrial female lineage figures lend support to this hypothesis and show that the first Melungeons tend to be families and couples, not solitary, scattered shipwrecked Portuguese sailors, as has sometimes been suggested. In some, Melungeon DNA is similar to Latin American, with the exception of a heavy Scot-Irish component. You see the difference? That's autosomal DNA findings. Autosomal DNA tests examine markers scattered across a person's entire genome, not just those located on the sex chromosomes for female inherited mitochondrial DNA. With them, we can estimate a test subject's overall ancestry and detect contributions that lie outside the direct male or female lines. A small study utilizing self-identifying Melungeon testants with a commercial firm, DNA Consultants, confirms the previous findings of organic chemist James Gutierrez, who used blood groups to tackle this ethnic group. The top population matches of presumed regions of ancestry for the participants indicates elevated levels of Jewish, primary Sephardic, but also Ashkenazi and Middle Eastern ancestry mixed with Native American and Sub-Saharan African. The European matches have Spain and Portugal in the top 10, behind, of course, Northwestern European populations like Scotland, revealing a submerged element of Iberian genetics in the predominantly Scots, Irish Appalachians. All right? There's an Iberian element in the Scot-Irish Appalachian people. All right? This picture is confirmed by average frequencies for met populations, two specifically Jewish populations, Spanish Sephardic and Hungarian Ashkenazic, appear time and again in Melungeon's profile. All right, so they got a little bit of the Ashkenazi Khazars. Now, it says here, social historical perspectives. Based on these results, the original Melungeon settlers, like many other New World colonists, probably were not primarily Christian. Native Americans, Berbers, and Sub-Saharan Africans held and hold religious belief of an animistic form that involves solar, lunar, water, earth, fire, seasonal deities, and traditions. Arab and Turkish descendant settlers brought Muslim traditions of syncretistic blend of Sunni and Shia theology. The Romani or Sinti people, Rome, Gypsy, Romeco travelers followed Jewish traditions and surprising numbers of parallels with Levitical law. So who's these original Gypsies or Romani that were coming to America with these Jewish Levitical laws? Listen, it's not the same as what we think of a gypsy today. Not really the same. What is a gypsy? Shout out to the author from and Modern Britons. We read over that. The gypsy were really coming from Romani. The Romani really came from America. They were calling them the red man. These Egyptians from ancient Egypt. They don't know how they got to England and all these places. There is no history of them traveling from India over there, going through Africa. There's no history of it. Because they were coming from the real Egypt, not from the fake Egypt. But they had come back during colonial times. They had come back, the same Romani people, Follow Jewish traditions, right? Levitical law and stuff, with some influence of Zoroastrianism and elements of fire worship from the sojourn in Mesopotamia, but not the slightest tincture of Hindu or Buddhist beliefs. You see what I'm saying? They didn't have none of that. Because that's what they say the gypsies are coming from. But they don't have none of those culture. It's like saying it's like calling you an African. Calling a gypsy a Hindu is like calling you an African. Where's the proof? How come you don't still carry your African culture and stuff? How come you didn't name your kids African names? Why don't you remember what tribal language it was? At least one word. Because it's not part of your genealogy. Right? So they had no Hindu beliefs despite having migrated from India, right? That's the official story of gypsies. Again, there's no proof of it. They really can't explain how they got to Europe. And speaking of Indic languages, customs and beliefs of the Roma and Sinti, Iberian and Polish Balkan Jews would have been able to blend their Sephardic and Ashkenazic religious practices. The emerging picture of mixed folkways is clear. A good overview of the role of Sephardic Jews in the history of modern-day mercantilism can be gleaned from Sephardic Genealogy, 2002 by Jeffrey Malka. This study observed that Dutch Sephardim in the Netherlands, remember Netherlands Dutch was the Black Dutch, was the Dutch traders and pirates and sailors and merchants, were small merchants or shopkeepers. Again, the Sephardic Dutch were the merchants and the shopkeepers. They dealt in tobacco and fish. Who was dealing tobacco? Dutch Sephardic, so-called black people, dealing tobacco plantations, dealing sugar plantations, dealing with so-called black slave, indigenous slaves. All right, you get the history. I'm not talking about so-called white people here. You can't blame so-called white man anymore. You can't just blame a complexion anymore, a crayon color anymore. You can't do that anymore. They worked as tailors or goldsmiths, physicians, money changers, and ran grocery stores. But some, such as the Pereira, all right, here we go again with the Pereira, Barrios, and the Pinto families, the Barros, shout out to the Cape Verdeans, yo. They got a lot of Pereira, Barros, and Pinto surnames. Shout out to the Cape Verdeans. You know what's up. Now you know what's up. Yeah, they ain't African. Rose to great wealth. These families rose to great wealth. Sephardic merchants dominated the lucrative trade in sugar, tobacco, silk, and precious stones. Wealthy Sephardim were very important both in the founding and running of the Dutch India and West India companies. Again, who? Wealthy Sephardim. Wealthy what? People of color. Wealthy so-called Negroes were very important. Let me just put it like that. Wealthy so-called black people, wealthy black people were very important both in the founding and running of Dutch East India and West India companies. Again, all the Pan-Africans out there, I hope they're listening. Wealthy black people were very important both in the founding and running of the Dutch East India and West India companies, right? All these companies that were supposedly bringing so-called African slaves, they were run by wealthy so-called black people. And they were really bringing their own unwanted, undesirable, indentured servant, their own crypto families, their own American Indian slaves that they had in these Dutch East Indian and West Indian ships. All right, they weren't even slave ships, cargo battalion ships. Show me one slave ship. All right. So a role we shall later show had great significance, right? We're going to read further chapters of this book where we're going to get into here how deep they were involved in the Dutch East India, West India Company. We've gone over it a little bit already, right? We're going to get into it a lot. Who's the main players? We'll prove to you these are people of color. We ain't just talking about white people here. We ain't just talking about a couple of so-called black people. No, man. I don't know what happened, whether it was Mandela effect or what. But hey, man, colonial times, everybody's starting to look very swarthy to me. Everybody's starting to look very swarthy to me. I don't know when it changed. We're still digging on that. It was definitely after the 1700s, though, it's starting to appear. 1800s, culminating 1900s. All this whitewashing. I'm telling you something deep right here. We're going to get into it. Malka further notes that Sephardim usually traded with their relatives, who lived as secret Jews in Spain, Portugal, and their possessions, the Canary Islands, Brazil, Florida, Cuba, and Mexico. Again, port Jews, keep it in the family, a network. That's why they were the ones in the East India and West India companies. They had all the networks, all the ships, all the money, all the trade. They used aliases in order to protect their kinsmen from the Inquisition. For example, Samuel Abravanel, Samuel de Sousa, Samuel Abad, who was Antonio Sanchez de Paz, Joseph Cohen, who was Jerónimo Enriquez, Isaac Franco, who was actually Francisco Mendez de Madeiros, Isaac Gaon, who was actually Felipe Diaz, Manasseh ben Israel, the famous Manasseh ben Israel. All right, anybody who doesn't know this, I didn't even know this. Manasseh ben Israel's real name was Manuel Diaz Soeda. Manuel Diaz Soeda. All right, he became Manasseh ben Israel. They anglicized, they changed their names, they made them Hebrew, you know. Solomon Nar, who was Manuel Ramirez de Pina. De Pina, another Cape Verdean surname, huh? Joshua Sarfati, Thomas Nunez de Pina, that was his real name. Jacob Semak, who was Antonio Hidalgo Cortizos. Aaron Musafia, who was Manuel Nunez. Michael Nahamias, Miguel de Castro. Joshua Nehemias, Antonio Lopez. Completely different names. How many times did this happen? All right, this is official. Same thing with Christopher Columbus. Same thing I was telling you earlier. His real name most likely was Salvador Fernandez Starco. Christopher Columbus' real name, aka Colon, it is a Moorish name anyways. Colon is Moorish, and Christopher means the Christ bearer, the title. Jewish merchants had an important advantage in being able to do business with and draw bills of exchange on relatives, friends, or business associates they could trust. Often, especially in England, they used the names of local citizens who were sympathetic to their cause as a front for their activities, giving the new associate stock in a joint venture. If the partner married into the family, a frequent outcome, he became an adopted member of the clan, subject to his rules of secrecy and code of commerce. All right? Secrecy and code of commerce. You got to keep it in the family. Malka also noted that some Sephardic surnames originated as early as the Babylonian exile. The Babylonian exilards. Going back to that. Among these are Aben Sur, Sothon, Ben Shushan, Malka, Dabai, and Hasdai. We will encounter Samson entering the Virginia colony prior to 1624. All right, one of these Sephardic, Arabic, Babylonian, right, surnames entering Virginia colony prior to 1624. He further knows that Sephardic Jewish families who claim descent from King David often use the biblical ruler's name as their surname. Right? Ben David. All right, example, Ben David. Ibn Duod or David. Davidson, Davis, Dawes. Yes, the Dawes roll. Remember, the Dawes roll is the David roll. The Dawes is Sephardic Jewish last name. The Dawes roll, yeah. Dodds, who is Wali Dodd, Farad, Wali Farad, Nation of Islam. Dodds, is that his real name? And he adds that during the Middle Ages, Sephardic surnames in Spain and France were frequently translated into their Latin equivalents. Hayim, vital or vidas, life. Shem Tov equals bon home or good man. Yom Tov, bon dia or bon dion. Tab Elam, bon enfant, bon fils or bonfil, good child. Sarfati equals Francis or Frank. You see that? Sarfati is Francis or Frank. Sephardi, Francis or Frank. So Sephardic, Sephardi, Sarfati, actually Frankish, French, Sena or Crescas or Verdugo, branch. Other Sephardim carry Berber surnames, for example, Ohana, O'Hara, O'Kinney, O'Sulini, Malkar, Nar, Montel, Tavora, Pardo, Brown. Nekim, Abban. Many names come from Hebrew words. For instance, Eliyahu or Adoniram, Deborah, Jonah, Jael, recalling their Babylonian exile and subsequent emancipation and release by Cyrus of Persia. Sephardim often use Cyrus as a given name. Memories are old among Jewish families. One of Daniel Boone's female ancestors was named Persis, an allusion to a line of Persian exilarchs. Sephardic Jews also adopted geographical surnames, for example, Asturia, as in the American Astor family, Belmonte, Cordovera. All right, so the Astors were Sephardic Jews at first. All right, big one right there. Belmonte, Cordovera, Frank, Marroquin, Medina, Rhodes, Roma, Romi, Rome, Russo, Russian, Russo. All right, these are Hebrew Sephardic places, names they took on. Soriano, Toledana, Turkey. Let's see, Caribbean Jews. Caribbean Jews. Mordecai Arbel in the Jewish nation of the Caribbean. 2002 brings us closer to the North American colonies. He knows that as the Conversos moved away from Iberia, they formed concentrations initially in nearby Spanish possessions such as Madeira, all right, the Azores and the Canaries. Thus, one clue to the Sephardic ancestry of North American colonists would be trading ties to these places. Conversos also congregated in the French cities of Bordeaux, Bayonne, and Rouen, all right? So a lot of those French people that are coming from those cities were actually Sephardic or Moorish people, all right? That's what I was telling you earlier. Arbel devotes specific chapters in his book to Barbados, Belize, Berbice, Colombia, Costa Rica, Curaçao and Danish West Indies, all right, Demerara, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Essequibo, Guyana, and Cayenne, Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Nevis, Panama, Maroon, and Suriname. Elias Ashmole was governor here. St. Eustatius, Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago, right? Tucacas, and Venezuela. Sephardim pioneered the rum. All right, listen to this. People of color. I know we're saying Sephardic, we're saying this. We're talking about people of color. I just want to be simple with you guys sometimes. I just want you guys to picture all this. Because they told us their whole fake history. They had us picturing all these so-called pale-skinned white people establishing, being pioneers and being the masters and the conquistadors and all that. That was all a lie, straight up. So Sephardim pioneers or people of color, black pioneered the rum. Negro people pioneered the rum, sugarcane, and orange juice industries, all right? Black people, so-called black people. According to Arbel, they were prominent in growing and refining coffee, cocoa, vanilla, indigo, vermilion, coconuts, and eggplant. Thus, when we encounter North American colonists engaged in these trades, we should view it as a possible sign of Sephardic ancestry. Once again, if we encounter any North American colonists, not talking about the Indians, because we know the Indians did this too. Come on, where did they learn it from? Where did these plants originate? Most of those, huh? You tell me. All right. But apart from the Indians, if you encounter any North American colonists engaged in these trades, we should view it as a possible sign of Sephardic ancestry. All right. Pay attention to that. Arbel also stresses the Sephardic Jews consider themselves one community, one nation. Remember, they kept it in the family. Poor Jews, keep it in the family. They married each other and everything. Whether they openly practiced their faith or were privately observant but publicly Protestant or Catholic. Listen, Protestant or Catholic, Protestant, Huguenots, Protestant. They were using Protestantism as a tag just to cover themselves from their real Judaic or Jewish Muslim ancestry. It was considered a distinct advantage to have relatives and friends on both sides of the fence, so to speak, to ensure security and protection from potential harassment or persecution. We shall see when we get to New York that several prominent Christian families were in fact conversos. When we get to New York, New York, we already know who were the Dutch. Who was the first colonizers and settlers of New York? Most of them, a lot of them Huguenots, Dutch, so-called Sephardic Dutch, Moorish people, Quakers, so-called Quakers, right? Protestants. A lot of those families were in fact conversos, and as some members of these families married openly Jewish house. Among the Sephardic surnames in the Caribbean identified by Arbel are Huel, Howell, Parkett, Park, Carreta, Atias, Molina, Miller. Molina is Miller. Miller is Molina. Letov, Barjuda, Pincheron, De Andredi. The Andredi is Andrews, is the Druze, is Theodorus. Remember? Theodorus, sometimes Andrews. Luis de Gama, Bueno, Good, Cohen, Lopez, Gabe, Israel, Bass, Nunez, Flores, Betancourt, Sale, Morocco, De La Roche, Beckham, De Vries, Lorenzo, Enoch, Eli, De Silva, Forrest Woods, Brandon, Enriquez is Henry, look at this, Henriquez, right? Henry, Brito, Arias, Polak from Poland, Pog, Nar, Montel, Tavora, Pardo, Brown, Mello, Alva, Farrell, Welcome, Hebron, Cape, Masley, Messiah, Lebar, Labat, Milan, Petit, Julet, Bernard, Robel, Robles, Nard, and Valencia. Nearly all these names are documented in Fagebones and Collaborative Surname Dictionary. Right? Marcus series. With the 3 large volumes, Jacob R. Marcus, the colonial American Jew, 1422, 1776, 1970, is the most substantial work on the Sephardic presence in British North America. Marcus traces the roots of American Jews to the important French crypto-Jewish Sephardic community beginning about 1550, all right? Pay attention. He emphasizes that many of the Iberian refugees publicly belonged to Huguenot. Many of the Iberian refugees were what? Huguenots, Walloons, all right? Walloons and other Protestant denominations. All these people are people of color, so-called black people, all right? You got a lot of this in your ancestry. He also acknowledges the crypto-Jewish and openly Jewish Sephardic communities in the Netherlands, which served as the seed bed for the large-scale return of the Jews to England, beginning about 1650, as well as the foundation of the New York colony. All right, the New York colony by the same Huguenot Walloon Protestant denominations, like I was telling you earlier. He suggests, as we noticed in chapter 1, that Cristobal Colon was a Converso Jew. Yeah, he was a Jew, Portuguese Jew. We're talking about Salvador Hernandez Sarco, whose family resettled in Italy, and that not only Columbus navigator, but also 5 additional crew members were Jewish, right? Alonso de la Calle, hold on, let me put the music down. Alonso de la Calle, Marco, a physician who bore the same surname as Marcus himself, Maestro Bernal, a physician, Rodrigo Sanchez de Segovia, the controller, and Luis de Torres. Luis de Torres, the interpreter. Remember, he was speaking Hebrew, Chaldean, and Arabic. That's what he was speaking to the Indians. Sephardim in the New World had a wide variety of occupations and lived at all levels of the socioeconomic spectrum, according to Marcus. They came in every type, as slaves and as royal noble people. Right? Slave masters and slaves. They were shoemakers, tailors, blacksmiths, tavern keepers, peddlers, mariners, masons, ship captains, factors, barkers, gold and silversmiths, butchers, tanners, physicians, notaries, mine and mill owners, merchants, candy manufacturers, slave dealers, city mayors, priests, bishops, bankers, tax collectors, and provincial governors. All right? These are all people of color filling these roles. Right, all these professions, right? Judaic religious traditions were usually observed in private. Worship services were held in the homes of anyone where a group would gather on Shabbat, because no copies of the Torah were available. These secret Sephardim would use the biblical One Testament and the Psalms, sometimes also books like Josephus, Ancient History of the Jews. Right, Marcus paints a revealing picture of Jewish mercantile activities involved with Spanish and English economic interests. All right. Some of the Jewish Barbadian firms were family partnerships which maintained offices in London where a brother or son or other relative lived permanently. Right. So they had these family networks, connections, again, controlling the trade, controlling the ports, the information, the commerce, money, the power. Many of the Caribbean consignees, agents, and factors of the London Jewish suppliers were fellow Sephardim. See, they were Sephardi. These Jews in the English Caribbean islands either did business with their fellow colonists or by one means or another, transshipped goods to the Spanish possessions, speaking Spanish and Portuguese. They soon established commercial relations with American Marranos and New Christians, American Morenos and New Christians, and further a traffic that brought hard specie into the coffers of the London merchants. Jewish importers and exporters in the British West Indies also had substantial dealings with Europe and the British North American colonies. The islands were particularly dependent on the North American colonies for provisions, and there was steady economic traffic between the Jews of the two areas. All right, they had this network on lockdown. This is more correlation, more primary sources. Actually, the Jews of the islands trading local slaves against Pennsylvania flour. So these people of color were trading what slaves? Who were these slaves they were trading for flour? You're being sold for flour. Many of your ancestors being traded for flour, right? For wine. That's biblical. I don't know. I'm just saying. I read that somewhere in the Bible, being traded for things like that, So who were these people of color trading? Was it other people of color, other Europeans, other Indians, That's what we got to look into, case by case. So they were doing this trade, right? They had been in touch with Philadelphia merchants as early as the late 1600s, when not even one open Jew lived in Philadelphia. The island sent sugar, molasses, rum, and spices to North America in exchange for fish, fodder grain, other foodstuff, and lumber. Ever since the second half of the 7th century, West Indian Jews had traveled back and forth as far north as New England. In 1679, for instance, 12 Jews had left Barbados, Nevis, and Suriname, and they came one each. 2 went to Jamaica, 2 to Antigua, 2 to London, 1 to New York, and 3 probably to Rhode Island. Right? So you see who's these sailors and merchants going around. And I have found this in people's genealogy. I have found people that were merchants, they're in some colony in the U.S., ending up in Barbados or Nevis. I have found the exact same thing. And they were listed as merchant and their whole history. And yes, they had Hebrew names. So you tell me who these people are, knowing the history. Among openly Jewish colonists in North America, it is perhaps Azar, or Assyrian Levi, or New York colony entrepreneur, who is the most prominent, at least in Marcus' opinion. His cohorts and contemporaries include a Pollock family: Moses, Lion, Chaim, Solomon, Mordecai, Uriah, Hendricks, and numerous Hases, named for the Hebrew letter. Moreover, several Dutch New York families, including Beckmans, De Vries, and Van Cortlands, are likely crypto-Jewish, a point we will revisit in a later chapter. Marcus notes anglicized names among the Jew like Valverde, Green, Moreno, Brown, and Baruch or Barrows, Boros or Brooks, all right? These are anglicized names of Sephardic people. Many of these crop up in the ranks of incoming settlers in Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, and other colonies. He documents that Jews coming to American colonies from Britain typically bear anglicized names: Franks, Barnetts, Henry Simon, son of Simon, all right? So this is very important when they're letting you know that a lot of these Sephardic Moorish people were already anglicized in their names before they came to the Americas. So by the time they reached America, you would just think they're, some English, Irish, Scottish, white people, normal Irish, English surnames, anglicized, Anglo-Saxon, right? But no, they were really crypto-Jews, crypto-Muslims. Straight up, people of color, black people, so-called black people, yes, who anglicized their names. Many of these crop up. Valentine, again, is another one. Michaels, Phillips, Oakes, Hart, Mears, Russell, Athens, and Lyons. Several of these reappear on the census roll in the colonies. He also establishes that Ashkenazic Jews from Eastern Germany and Poland figure among the immigrants of the 1700s, some passing through Ireland and England on their journey to North America. It must not be forgotten that Hamburg and Bremen, Germany's 2 major ports, lay at the time in the English-held provinces of Brunswick and Hanover. In our view, Marcus underestimates the total Jewish population in the colonies, which he places at no more than 2,500. in 1816. In later chapters, all right, so he didn't know, that's what he's saying, because there was anglicized all these names. They didn't really do a thorough history of it, of who these people really were. In 1816, later chapters, we will argue that there were many persons of Jewish ancestry who resided in British North America, but who did not openly practice their religion, all right? Often they were crypto Jews and crypto Muslims, British North America. Marcus at least devotes a great deal of space to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, as having a large and prosperous Jewish community by the 1700s. From here, Jewish merchants such as the Gracies pioneered land companies and trading routes that stretched far into the interior of the continent. We will argue that several other communities and specific religious congregations in Pennsylvania were clearly crypto-Jewish in character, even if on the surface they seem to be Quaker Lutheran. Marcus does not neglect Canadian Jewry and painstaking detail. He reconstructs the trade correspondences and intermarriages between French Jews and Sephardic families, such as the Lopezes and Newport, Rhode Island. A list of the surnames from DNA studies associated with the English colonies' northern neighbor is given below. Eli Farber's A Time for Planting, the first migration in 1654 and 1820. Part of the series, The Jewish People in America, augments Marcus' survey of colonial Jewish life with case stories of Caribbean and Brazilian Jews. The Savannah Colony of 1733, right? Savannah, Georgia, right? Listen. And Curaçao colonists who arrived in New Amsterdam in 1664, all right? His approach is to present these scattered communities as a paradigm for the development of the United States as a multi-ethnic and multiracial society, all right? Although he correctly assesses the religious currents of the day and alliances with the English landowning families back home as major factors, he seems to miss the larger picture of the Sephardic diaspora and support network which underlie these developments. By the same token, although Todd Endelman's 1979 study of the Anglo-Jewish elite in contemporary Georgian England does not deal with America, his work fails to grasp the deeper motives for Sephardic participation in the never-enlarging English sphere of influence, all right? So again, he's letting us know. I just want you guys, before we leave, I know it's probably a long video. You guys are like, oh, blah, 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 blah. Hopefully not. But he's letting us know that they weren't really emphasizing the role that these Muslims and Jews, straight up these so-called black people, these black Europeans, these Sephardic Moorish people played in the creation of the American colonies and government. All right? Neither Farber nor Endelman consider the possibility that the religious currents and goodwill of certain English families may have been driven by lingering crypto-Jewish tendencies. All right? Talking about freedom of religion, that's one of the main things right in America, right? Freedom of religion, right? When we talk about American Revolution and these people being fighting for freedom, what freedom? What people? This is deep. All right? In common with Jacobs and others, Farber traces a gradual decline in Sephardic Jewish impact in the late 18th century, a time when ostensibly it culminated and was most vigorous and influential. Much of the slack in colonial Jewish studies is taken up by Rabbi Malcolm Stern's American Jewish Descent, 3rd edition, 1991. This is exactly what it says, a compendium of genealogy, but it also an indispensable source for tracing surnames and the intricate interrelationships among Sephardic merchant families. Included are 25,000 individuals. The appearance of a given surname is a virtual guarantee that the family was Jewish or at least crypto-Jewish. Its spotlight is largely on Sephardic Jews. All right, so you guys can go get that book. With Ashkenazi families playing only a minor role in the charts. All right, there was some Ashkenazi. Remember, these are different type of so-called Jews. It's not the same. We're not talking about Khazars here. We're talking about Sephardic Jews, right? It's a very minor role they had in that book, in those charts, the Ashkenazi families. It was actually mainly Sephardic, Moorish family. And Stern purposely says the terminus and at Quimby, which families had to be established in North America at the year 1840. After that date, it is the Ashkenazim who are in the ascendancy. All right. So after that, deep right there, after 1840s, is when you start seeing Ashkenazis, right? We're talking about 1400s, 1490. Columbus got here. We're talking about almost 400 years. All right, 400 years of people of color. We're talking about 400 years of Muslim, Sephardic, Jewish people being the Hebrews or the Jews that they're talking about in history in colonial times. Because the Ashkenazi ones didn't come till after 1840s, if anything. After that date is the Ashkenazim who are in the ascendancy. Omitting the obviously Hebrew and European Jewish surnames in Stern, some of the surprising entries into the annals of colonial America Jewry include Adams, all right, Adams, Alexander, Allen, Andrews, Ball, Aramaic for Lord, Barnett from Issachar, Barrett from Blackwell, Brandon Brown, Bruce Bryant, Bush, Callahan, Campbell, Carter, Cartier, Cheeson, Clark Cooper, a former Jacob, Davenport, Davidsport, Davenport is Davidsport, David, Davis, Delancey, Ellis, Alice, Eden, Falk, Forbes, Franklin, Goodman, Goodwin, Gordon, a corruption of Cohen, Greg, example Greek, Byzantine, Hamilton from Hamiltown, Harvey, Hart, similar to German Hirsch or Hawkins, Hayes, Henry, Houston, Howard from Hereward, one of William the Conqueror's retainers, Hunt, Jackson, all right, I'm going to show you what Jackson means before we end today. Jackson, yeah, Jackson is a Sephardic Jewish name. Johnson, Labatt, Johnson, remember Johnson, Anthony Johnson, first black so-called slaver? Yeah, Sephardic Jew, most likely. Labatt, Langley, Anglius, English, Lawson, Lewis, Lloyd, man, Martin, Spanish for warlike, Martin for warlike, that's what Martin means, Spanish for warlike. Michaels, Mitchell, Moore, Morrison, McBlair, Newberry, another aristocratic Norman name. Newhouse, Newman, Nichols, Philip, Price, Rice, Robinson, son of Reuben, Robin, son, the son of Robin or Reuben, right? Rogers, Russell, Shaw, Hebrew letter, Simpson, Phil Stewart, all right? Story, Thompson, Valentine, Watson, West, White, Hebrew, Laban, Whitehead, Williams, Wilson, Wood, Yates, Righteous, Covert, and Young. Of course, the appearance of his surname in this list does not mean that everyone bearing it's Jewish anymore. Then having a name like Cohen necessarily means that person of Jewish faith or ancestry. That's true, because there could be, a lot of marriages, a lot of mixing in, and, a lot of things. Adoption, So he's right. Doesn't mean they're necessarily just the so-called old school, Old Testament, so-called Hebrews. Right? But inclusion is a clue, and it is intrusive that some of the sturdiest Anglo-Saxon sounding surnames, for instance, Yates, makes the rolls, which multiple entries, some are even borne by rabbis. So recent scholarship has also brought to light the presence of Converso Jews among the French colonists in North America. Right? French, Huguenots, we already know. In North America, we shall see several of these, such as Arnaud, Alexander, Brandon, Cassell, the Sept or clan of Kennedy, and Noble in the British colonies as well. Some French Canadian Sephardic surnames. This is the list right here. All right, Allaire, Bellemare, Bernard, Bilodeau, Boucher, Burgess, Case, Charpentier, Cholet, Docks, Dube, Dugas, Ebliner, Forcier, Garrett, Lefleur, Lefont, Lemont, Le Rochelle, LeBlanc, Levinch, Lovers, Marion, Martin, Mecad, Morse, Payur, Pelan, Planty, Trottier, Vaudrin, Vigil, Vicinor, and Weisner. It says here, traditional scholarship in the fields both of genetic and history has had the effect of dispossessing the Sephardim of their true character and place in Jewish civilization. All right? They left these people out of history. And these are people of color. And this is why. Because if you were to actually know that these were Sephardic and Moorish people, you would actually have done the research and the genealogy, and we would have been known a long time ago, or it would have been public knowledge that these were people of color, most likely. Right? And that these same people were the actual colonists. So when we would have been doing our genealogy and we would have been hearing about African, we were like, what are you talking about? These are people of color coming here to America as colonists. So again, they're letting you know traditional scholarship in the fields both genetics and history has had the effect of dispossessing the Sephardim of their true character and place in Jewish civilization and world population figures. Sephardic Jews outnumbered Ashkenazi Jews until about 1800. All right, pay attention. Please, I've been saying this a lot. I've been telling you, if you see 1700s, all right, maybe 1800s, you can still kind of, but even in the 1800s, if you're doing your genealogy, you're seeing Hebrew names, Isaac, Jacob, you know, Elizabeth, Reuben, all of the 12 tribes, all of them, you know, they're all there in the family names, right? If you see all that and you're already in the 1700s, hey, straight up, I'm telling you right now, most likely you better believe it, these are people of color, so-called Negro people, free people of color in USA during slavery times, who are landowners, who are the blacksmiths, who are the bankers, who are founding towns, who are founding plantations and everything, establishing towns, communities, mixing with Indians. Again, Ashkenazi Jews didn't come about until after the 1800s, all right, way later. We're talking about almost 400 years of black so-called colonists that they left out of history. And you're supposed to be only African? When you have no African genealogy or slave ships or proof of that, or you do have proof that you may be Indian, and you have a lot of proof that you might be descended from one of these crypto Jews or Muslim Moors that colonized initially before the Ashkenazi and these other pale-skinned people came about after the 1800s. That's a deep one right there for you to think about. With the destruction of Eastern European Jewry in the Holocaust, followed by the founding of the State of Israel, Sephardim now define it and including those Middle Eastern Jews like the Germanic community who have mostly returned to Israel, have begun regaining their prominence. Elizabethan England harbored not only a growing level of pro-Sephardic sentiment, but just as likely, a continuing element of crypto-Jews. Let us proceed now to the first of England's colonies in America to see how the Sephardic Jews and crypto-Jews numbered in the vanguard of its leaders, as well as rank and file. This great book, Jews and Muslims in British Colonial America, a genealogical history, is called Book of Jewish and Crypto-Jewish Surnames. All right. Just want to go to, I mean, I have so many surnames, right? So Jacob Jackson, huh? Yeah. Jackson actually comes from Jacob. I'm gonna just show you what it actually means, though. All right, here we go. All right, it says here, Jackson or Jackson is an English or Scottish surname meaning son of Jacks or Jacob. Son of Jacob. So who's Jacob? It is first found in Northumberland and is often included in border river surnames. Example, those families who lived on the borderlands between England and Scotland. There were Jacksons, also in Stirling, Renfrewshire, and Aberdeen. All right, the Jacksons, right? The Jackson Five, Michael Jackson, right? Jackson family. What does it mean? Son of Jacks or Jacob, son of Jacob or children of Jacob or descendants of Jacob, the sons of Jacob. Jacob was the progenitor of the Israelites in the Bible. Who's the Jacksons really? Who are the Jacksons? Who are the Jacksons? Even though they may be coming from Europe, who are the Jacksons? We're just talking about crypto-Jewish surnames, the sons of Jacob. Who's the Jacksons?